Hi, good morning. I'm Terri Markham, and I'm the Executive Director of Uprising. We are back today with more of our It's All Connected series. We originally thought we were just going to keep it in 1 month, but it was so good. We've gotten such good feedback that we've decided to just keep rolling with it and just keep doing more interviews. So today we are joined by Cassidy Drew. She is the volunteer coordinator for the Advocacy and Resource Center, which is a victim serving agency here in Sheridan, Wyoming. And we are going to be talking about sexual assault today because it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So, what a great topic. So, welcome, Cassidy. Thank you for being here. Why don't we start with you just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about the agency that you work for and how you came to be there?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Terri. I'm so excited for our conversation today. So my name is Cassidy Drew. I am the volunteer coordinator and a victim advocate here at the Advocacy and Resource Center. We are a nonprofit organization in Sheridan, Wyoming that serves victims of violence in Sheridan County. I have been an advocate since September of 2015, so I'm on year 5 going into 6. I became the volunteer coordinator in the beginning of 2018, and my role as the volunteer coordinator has been to coordinate and train new volunteers, including our crisis line advocates. And then as a victim advocate, I work alongside 5 other folks in the office to provide direct services to victims of violence. That also includes anyone who has been a victim of a violent crime. So we provide a variety of services based on a person's needs when they come in or call or are referred to us by law enforcement or another parallel agency. And so we serve people for domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking, but also for other interpersonal or other violent crimes, such as human trafficking, homicide, elder abuse, child physical and sexual abuse, aggravated DUI, robbery, burglary, arson, or any other violent crime where someone may feel that their safety has been compromised as a result of an intentional or unintentional crime committed. We also serve folks who have never reported anything to law enforcement. So that's not a requirement for coming in. It's just how that's the system through which we get a little under half of our referrals here. But we also can serve folks at any part of their journey through victimization, whether or not they are at the point where they are working on a plan to leave an abusive partner, or maybe they were a victim of child sexual abuse and it's recently come up in their life and they're in need of some extra emotional support or crisis intervention. So all of our services are really specific and dependent on each person's unique situation. And so the baseline services that we may provide are things such as crisis intervention, safety planning, of course, and risk assessing, emergency temporary shelter, 24-hour crisis line, medical advocacy if they're going to the ER or they are in need of a sexual assault exam following an incident. And then we're also a victim witness program. So we provide assistance all the way through the criminal justice process, anywhere from court notifications to support through a jury trial, and of course, notifying folks of their rights under the Wyoming Victim Bill of Rights statute. So we do a lot here, and we love this work that we do. We're happy to serve the community. And we're also in the community in other aspects as well. So partnering with agencies just like yours, doing prevention, education, outreach, and then of course, celebrating and getting word out about our awareness months, which is, this month, April, Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So there's my long-winded intro to what the Advocacy Center does.
No, that's perfect. Do you think that there are specific crimes that you probably serve victims of more than others in your center?
Sure. So based on our statistics, a majority of the crimes or victimizations that we're serving people on are those interpersonal crimes. So monthly and yearly, our highest statistics are serving folks for domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. And those are not only crimes that pose a lot of really unique risks and effects on people's lives, but we also did begin this work as the Women's Center, specifically serving women and children leaving domestic violence relationships. And so I think what we're known for has carried, it still carries, into, our this year and stuff. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Okay, so it is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So can you tell us a little bit of why it's important? Why do we need a month to, talk about awareness of sexual assault?
Sure. So without rattling off a bunch of statistics, I would suggest checking out rain.org, their resources on statistics. But what we know as advocates are the prevalence of sexual violence in our country is very high. There are, I believe it's about every 73 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. That's a lot of people. And I think it's somewhere around, I want to say close to 450,000, give or take, victims each year. And so there are a lot of people who are vulnerable and unfortunately become victimized by sexual violence. There's also a higher risk for communities of color, and there's also a higher risk for our younger populations. And so these are folks who are, historically marginalized or have higher vulnerabilities in our communities. And so it's really, really important to draw attention to the prevalence of sexual assault for both victims and people who are, self-identifying as survivors to, I think there's really two sides. I think drawing attention to education, to letting people know, what is sexual assault? What is consent? How do I identify it? How can I get help after? But also prevention and really rallying around, the protective factors in our communities, like, giving kids and giving teens and giving adults just recognition that they're not alone if they are a victim or a survivor of sexual violence. So it's such an important month and something to be really celebrated and addressed and kind of called out in a way, really, really taking the taboo out of the conversation and bringing it to light.
Yeah, and this is just popping into my head as you're talking. We're in Wyoming and we are in a very rural state. And on top of that, we're in a pretty small, quaint little town in Wyoming here in Sheridan as well. So, can you speak to sort of, are there vulnerabilities and things even in these rural towns where it's affecting sort of that climate of sexual assault? Because a lot of people I feel like still have that, believe that myth of like, oh, it can't happen in our like little towns and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some uniqueness to living in a rural community, and victims of all types of interpersonal crimes really face a lot of unique barriers. One of the things maybe we'll get to talking about is how sexual assault isn't necessarily it can be, but it's not necessarily a one-time incident, perpetrated by a stranger, even an acquaintance. Sexual assault can be a dynamic of dating violence or domestic violence. And so rural communities struggle with resources for survivors, such as housing, transportation, access to resources, and unique barriers. And I know we're talking about sexual assault today and human trafficking, but those other dynamics like domestic violence, ongoing abuse are really, really a part of the conversation as well. And so, and maybe in a small town, I'm not a Sheridanite, so I've only lived here for the time I've been working here, but where we're located culturally and having these conversations and moving from violence and trauma as a private family matter into a public conversation, a public health issue, I think is always what rural communities might struggle with, just based on, and I wouldn't even say just rural communities. I think that's a precedent that's been set for all communities, that interpersonal violence and sexual violence is just not to be talked about. It's to be swept under the rug. It's a private family matter. And that throws up a lot of barriers for victims and survivors.
Absolutely. What do you think, or is there a certain thing that stands out to you, or things that you think people still just maybe don't quite grasp or understand about sexual assault?
Ooh, I gave a lot of thought to this question because I think it can be answered in a few different ways. We're always pushing back against negative stereotypes and cultural myths about sexual assault, about victims of sexual assault, and even about the process of reporting and accessing other services. But what I really thought about was how when those negative stereotypes and those myths sort of take over the conversation, it's really easy to forget that sexual assault is about power and control. So if power and control aren't considered in the dynamic of sexual assault, then it just becomes left up to interpretation that it's like a miscommunication or a mutual hookup gone wrong or two drunk people. There's this mutuality that gets thrown into the kind of the reason behind why sexual assault happens. But really, sexual assault is not a bad hookup. It's about one person taking power over the other person and using sexual violence to do so. And so I think it's really, really important for people to understand that it's not about sex. It's about power, just through the means of sex and sexual violence.
That's really good. Like when you say it like that, I feel like it makes it a lot more clear, even for someone like me who's been in the field a long time. That's so true. To put your thumb on that is really great. Um, Tell me about, are there any cycles or patterns that you notice, like doing victim services for these victims?
Yeah, so like I said, it's hard to kind of split up victimizations, because a lot of times, and this is what I talk with, this is what we do for education purposes too, is like sexual assault is often part of an ongoing dynamic. So whether it's dating violence, domestic violence, or stalking, even sexual assault can become a tool or a tactic in that abusive dynamic. So, and I would say that a majority of people who have experienced sexual assault may have experienced domestic or dating violence as well. Maybe not through this encounter, but previous. So it's very normal for folks to come in to use our services multiple times. It's really up to the individual how they want to leave or how they want to handle or move forward with the trauma they've experienced. And there's another cultural myth or negative stereotype, that a victim, there's a good victim, and to be a good victim, you move forward, you report immediately, you seek therapy, but that's just not true. When someone's experienced a traumatic situation or may still be in the middle of ongoing sexual violence, they may have to create a pretty solid plan for how they want to move forward, and then moving through other types of coping mechanisms. People may fall into addiction, they may fall into further violence. There are a lot of it's not a linear path for a lot of people. And so but everyone has the autonomy to make the decision about how they want to move forward, when they want to move forward, who they want to disclose to. And so I would say over the course of, someone coming to terms or labeling what they've been through as sexual assault or sexual violence, they work through a lot of those choices. And so we may see someone multiple times over the course of that journey, really figuring out, maybe initially we meet with someone who's in the hospital and they get a sexual assault exam, but they don't want to report. And then a few months later, they do want to report. And then a few months later, they don't want to be a part of the criminal justice process, or they're looking for other ways of healing. So it's definitely common for us to see people multiple times, but mostly because people are trying to figure out what to do next, how to move forward.
Yeah, I think I'm a little curious because I feel like sometimes for people on the outside who haven't experienced any sort of sexual violence, um, just the way you were talking brought this question up into my head. But can you speak to a little bit about? I often hear from people like they need a report, they should have reported. And what you're talking about, how you really follow the victim's lead and everything is their choice. Why is that so important? And what would you say to those people who kind of, they don't see the whole picture and understand and they do sometimes you hear that a
Yeah.
lot like why didn't they report? They should have reported it. And
Yeah.
yeah.
It's such a good question, and I don't fault people for that question, because if you've never had to interact with the criminal justice system, it's really easy to really not have any context for how it works. And I would say, first and foremost, after someone has been victimized in any way, a choice has been taken from them. And so it's really important as an advocate to make sure that they're given choices back to them. And so one of those choices is whether or not to participate in the criminal justice process. Now, what most people may not know is that in the state of Wyoming, individuals do not press charges. The state of Wyoming presses charges against an individual. And so after a victim reports, they sort of, the process sort of is out of their hands in terms of the investigation, whether or not charges are filed, what the county attorney's office chooses to do, whether to file charges or decline charges. And then if they're subpoenaed for a jury trial, they may not have any say whether or not to participate in that process. And so the ball gets rolling, and victims have rights in the process, but the one thing they can't control is, what the agents of the criminal justice system choose to do with the information that a victim has reported. And so it's really, really important for victims to understand that, so that when they do make the choice to report or not report, they are fully informed of what will happen next. And we try to make sure that we, give them true and accurate information at all times. And there's a lot of statistics about you know people who report sexual violence. There's this many people who report sexual violence. There's this many perpetrators who are arrested for sexual violence. There's this many perpetrators who are found guilty, and there's this many perpetrators who spend time, who actually, complete a full sentence of time. And so I do think that there is a overestimation of how many people are held accountable through the justice system for committing sexual violence as well.
Yeah, and I've often heard it referenced. People will say that sexual violent crimes are one of the only crimes where it feels more like sometimes the victim is on trial than the
Mhm.
actual perpetrator of the crime.
Yeah.
So I don't know, to me it's always made sense. Like it's a lot to put someone through, I feel like. Is that what you think as well or see as well?
Well, it's interesting because, I'm not an attorney, which is great because I don't give legal advice. I'm an observer of the process, but what I have observed is that perpetrators who if charges are filed against them become defendants, they have rights as well, and one of those rights is not to not to say anything. I mean, we have the fifth, is it the Fifth Amendment?
Yeah, plead the fifth.
Plead the fifth, right? And defendants don't even have to take the stand, whereas victims or witnesses in cases typically have to retell their story multiple times and may not have a choice whether or not to. And in the retelling process, that can be victimizing. Being met without empathy or even being shamed or blamed through the process can be re-victimizing. And not having a successful outcome of a jury trial can be re-victimizing, like why did I even say anything? They're just going to get away with it. So that's that. And that's not something as an advocate that I can do for anyone. I can elevate someone's voice in all sorts of situations, but I can't speak for anyone through the criminal justice process. And so it really, really needs to be thoroughly understood, that they're going to have to participate.
Yeah, and that's where you guys can come in and help them you can help them understand the process. You just can't make those choices for them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and and our role is really unique because we get to believe people, and we don't have to prove anything to provide services. We're not investigating or fact checking. We're here as an emotional support, as true and accurate information. And so it's really easy for me because I don't need the details. I don't even necessarily need a full story. If someone's telling me they're feeling unsafe and we can have a conversation, then services can be provided, but that's not how it necessarily works in the criminal justice process.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like in more recent years, the conversations around sexual assault and even human trafficking are becoming more prevalent. We've had all these high profile cases like the Harvey Weinstein and things like that. Do you feel like sort of the landscape of these conversations around sexual assault are changing or developing in a good way, a bad way, or just any differences you've noticed, I guess, working in the field with all of this?
That's such a good question. I mean, I don't know if I serving people has increased, or if I day to day feel the ripple effect. But I can imagine that it has opened a door that can't be closed. I mean, right now, there's a high profile Republican congressman who's being investigated for human trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
And, we had the Jeffrey Epstein stuff and the Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too movement. And so I think on the positive side, I think it's given survivors a platform that was risky to take before. It's created, I want to say it's probably both created a safe place, but maybe exacerbated, anti or victim blaming sentiments too. And because a lot of, we have the media and we have the press reporting on these stories, but a lot of survivors are coming out through social media. And we know, you and I know as educators and advocates, that social media is also a breeding ground for abuse and violence as well. And so that's just my personal take is I think it's definitely positive. I think it's really positive, and sometimes the court of public opinion is the only place where people are held accountable. But at the same time, I do wonder, whether or not people who have shared their stories publicly are getting more harassment, are actually facing that re-victimization, right?
Yeah,
Telling
you
the
can't
story.
control who's throwing your stuff out there over and over.
Yeah. And so it's a really, really courageous act to come out and tell your story, but there are a lot of people ready to shut it down, especially on the internet.
I'm not sure if it's the same in the field of sexual assault as it is in human trafficking, but with so much publicized stuff, we almost have people going too far to the other side now, where there's just tons of conspiracy and misinformation out there as well. I don't know that we've seen that in sexual assault specific the way we have in human trafficking, but that's probably the negative I've seen.
I don't think we've quite seen any negativity that wasn't there already.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say this before I say my next thing. Survivors have the right, they have the autonomy to share their story however they want to. When I become concerned, though, for survivors when the public gets to examine and pick apart their stories and reinforces that good survivor, bad survivor binary. Mm-hmm. And so the only possible, I would say, consequence for future survivors is once you start to read and hear so many survivor stories, that I do think people will feel that it's appropriate to judge survivor stories. Because they don't have, they might not have context, or may not, be in a position where they understand what victim blaming is. But that's my own personal setback. And like I said, I'm not trying to censor a survivor in any way, but I worry that then that creates, I think the more people who share their story, the more people will understand, that it's so different for every person. Mm-hmm. But I just don't want that to ever be turned around on survivors.
Yeah,
because people are already looking for a way to blame them. Yes. People are already looking for a way to validate their own victim blaming.
I almost feel like you need a level of understanding to be able to understand a survivor's viewpoint sometimes, mm-hmm. understanding that it can be completely fragmented, it can be out of order. There's physical things in their body that, might make them just completely forget details or things
Mhm.
like that. And it's one of those kind of, if you don't know, you don't know situations. So yeah, if you hear a story missing tons of pieces, you might be like, this makes no sense. But
Yeah.
maybe you knew the reasoning why sometimes those stories are missing so many pieces, then it's like, oh. So
Yeah.
I don't know. That's something that, I've learned in
Mhm.
the victim serving field for so many years.
Yeah.
Just every story is totally different. And I agree with you that we're in the lucky position where we believe survivors no matter what. And
Mhm.
so uh, that makes it easy. I'm just like, yes, I believe you. I'm here for you. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's a really good point that you made. Let's move into a little bit now to the human trafficking side of things
Yes.
because it's all connected. So
Mhm.
I want to hear from you. How do you think sexual assault and human trafficking are connected?
Sure. I thought a lot about this question too. So inherently, human trafficking, and we're referring specifically to sex trafficking, is a form of sexual assault, is a form of sexual violence. Um, I think how they are related is to bust through the myths about human trafficking as well. Most people think of it as strangers who maybe steal a child and traffic them, through these really seedy motels. Or I mean, you and I could we could create
Mhm.
this scenario that is so straight out of like
A
a
movie.
movie.
Yeah.
Right. But why I think they are definitely connected is a lot of times in order to become a trafficker, you have to gain the trust of the victim. And one of the most simple ways to gain trust is to already have a personal relationship with that person. And so human trafficking is not necessarily the stranger crossing state lines with someone in their truck. Human trafficking can be happening in domestic violence, in dating violence, in families. And so a trafficker can be a spouse, a partner, or a trusted family member, and it could be happening while the victim is also still living their life.
Hmm.
And so it could be a young teenager or a new mom or, um, you know, a couple who is um, struggling through housing or poverty needs, and trafficking becomes the means of power and control in the dynamic. So, um, yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. I do. That's so true. And I wrote down here almost always victims of sex trafficking have, they already usually typically have a history of sexual abuse or violence um, in their background, which I'm pretty sure that's probably something that you see in the victim services field. A lot of times, these victims and survivors that we work with, they have a long history of prior abuse that might have been present already.
Mhm.
Do you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. You know, we're again, it's really, really important to center this conversation through the lens of power and control. So
Hmm.
it's not about sex. Sex is just the vehicle through which the control and the power is maintained. Um, so when someone has a past history of abuse or sexual assault, a trafficker, who could be a spouse, who could be a partner, who could be a family member, uses those vulnerabilities to then exploit that person. And so it may be something as simple as, um, in childhood, they were a victim of sexual assault. And so now in adulthood, they are, dependent on their partner for um, care and love and attention. And the trafficker promises them care and love and attention if they make them money through trafficking. And so, and you and I we could go through countless, countless ways that this dynamic works out, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I mean, for as much as like, as hard as it is, I guess, to bring up conversations of sexual assault in communities and for people to believe the prevalence of how much sexual assault is happening, I think there's even like a whole nother layer when it's human trafficking. Really, people just do not believe that human trafficking can happen in communities like ours and rural communities. Um, have you guys ever worked with victims of human trafficking?
Yes, we have. I would say it's probably not self-identified as often as the other types of victimization. It may not be something that is necessarily understood by the victim, that that's what's going on, that they're being trafficked. Or they could not really, they don't necessarily have any reason to trust us initially. So maybe they do want to talk about, the domestic violence, but they're not ready to disclose the trafficking. But we have worked with victims in the past for human trafficking, and through different types of dynamics. So we've worked with people who are traveling through, and it's sort of a red flag relationship that another agency refers them to us for. And I've also worked with people who are currently married to the person they're being trafficked by. So we see a variety of dynamics when it comes to human trafficking, but it is certainly underreported even to us as a victim services agency, for sure.
Yep. But you answer the question there. Does it happen here?
Yeah.
Yes.
It does.
I think that sort of wraps us up with everything I wanted to talk about, Cassidy. Thank you for answering all my questions. You did them so eloquently, much better than me asking questions. But now is your chance to sort of give a shameless plug. So tell us a little bit more about ARC and how to find you guys and what you're up to and how to support agencies like yours.
Yeah, so it's really, really kind of exciting being able to be back in the community and work on those partnerships and strengthen our prevention education outreach, while still kind of navigating COVID. So April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and we have something planned, nothing in person to sort of bring attention to Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Next Wednesday, April 28th, we are celebrating Denim Day.
Yay.
So follow our Facebook for more information, or I believe you can go to denimday.org and learn more about it. Quite a few years ago now, an Italian court, I think they overturned a conviction for sexual assault because the judge said that the victim's pants were too tight and her denim jeans were too tight. So she must have helped the perpetrator take them off. And so this kind of spanned an uprising, if you will, globally, drawing attention to this systematic victim blaming, essentially. And so now, last Wednesday of every April, which is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we celebrate, we uplift, we commit to breaking the stereotypes of victim blaming by wearing all denim. So if you'd like to participate, it's totally virtual. You can dress in your finest denim if you want to do a denim jacket, denim pants, or a full ensemble. Take a picture of yourself and tag us on Facebook or send it to us so that we can upload it. And just really, really kind of showing our community that we stand with survivors and against victim blaming. So yeah,
That's
That's
awesome.
sort of our virtual celebration. And then of course you can check out our Facebook page or tons of national resources doing all sorts of campaigns. Right now, the National Sexual Violence Resource Center is doing a really awesome monthly campaign for safety in online spaces, which has become a huge part of our life now. And so lots of cool stuff happening.
Yay, awesome. Well, thank you for your time today, Cassidy. It was nice chatting with you. And thanks for all the information. It was awesome.
Thank you, Terri. You're awesome.